Welcome back, everybody. It is Saturday, October 31st. Happy Halloween to everybody. We are 3 days away now from the elections in November. Tremendously exciting. We just put out one of our last presidential election prediction videos. This is going to be among the final Senate election prediction videos. As I mentioned in the presidential one, just keep an eye because something has come up and I will be traveling over the next several days. So whether or not we were able to put out a video remains up in the air. But this is going to be our Senate election prediction. Currently, again, 35 to 30. Let's just kind of set up the table for you. There are 10 legitimate possibilities for the Democrats. You can even kind of say 11 of them as well that could ultimately flip from one side to the other. In this video, just as we did with the presidential race, we are going to be giving you a percentage prediction. Now, obviously, I don't expect to really be held to these predictions as these are down to the tenths of percentage points. So, if anyone really wants to take me to task over that, have at it. But obviously there are so many compelling races here. Right now, the Democratic Party, according to 538, has a 76% chance of flipping the United States Senate. So before we get into the election here, or the prediction here, I should say, let's just kind of give you a sense of what that means. First, from the Republican side, you have a 24% chance of retaining the Senate. Well, if you're a Republican voter, here's what you're thinking about right now. Well, in 2018, that was a Democratic wave year, and we actually ended up gaining 2 Senate seats, which, looking back on it now, was entirely necessary for that to happen because we see just how vulnerable they are now. If the Democrats had made it a neutral 0-0 pickup for either side, they would be a shoo-in to flip the Senate and would actually be in contention for like a big majority. I'm talking 55, 56 seats. But that's obviously not going to... It is possible, actually, they could reach 55, but I can't really imagine them pulling that out. So if you're the Democrats, though, you have a 76% chance of winning. You obviously feel good about that. But as I said in the presidential election prediction video, I want to say this again. If I gave you a bottle of 100 tablets and I said, 76 of them are for allergies, but 24 of them are poisonous, would you take one out of that bottle? I sure as hell wouldn't. You have a 1 in 4 chance practically of, succumbing to a poisonous tablet, okay? So let's get right into it. It's obviously very contentious right now. We don't know exactly how these results are going to end up. But first, we're going to start in Alaska, where polling has tightened. I would say 6 months ago, this was a state in which the Democratic Party... By the way, when I say percentages here, what I mean is percent chance of winning. This is going to be different from the presidential election prediction video where we actually gave you percentages, because in all 50 states we can compare them to what happened in that election 4 years ago, whereas we can't do that in this video. So this is actually a percentage which candidate has a percentage chance of winning. Okay, so I just want to clarify that. So in Alaska, 6 months ago, as I was saying, the Democratic Party had a chance here because this is a wild card state. You never know exactly what could happen in Alaska. The ball could just bounce your way one night if you're an independent, if you're a Democrat. Now, the Republican Party obviously has kind of a built-in edge here, given that it is a Republican state. It votes, Republican usually pretty easily on the presidential level. Don Young has been there in the House for ages. Usually has 2 Republican senators at the moment. We get the idea. But again, you just never quite know. And Al Gross was, of course, an independent who had... But at the same time, we understand that would be a flip for the Democrats. Since then, though, the polling has narrowed, and even though this is a difficult state to poll, the polling we have seen in this state has been pretty close, and it's been from very, very highly graded pollsters as well. We've seen CNN, New York Times polls here, Post-ABC polls here that show Al Gross within the margin of error against Dan Sullivan. So right now, I think Al Gross's best pitch is basically saying, okay, I can win this race because it's Alaska, you never know exactly what's going to happen, and Dan Sullivan, for all we know, is just a very unknown guy. He's not very popular, he's not very unpopular, he's just inconsequential. There isn't going to be a big surge of turnout for him because he's, overwhelmingly bipartisan or anything like that. He's just a guy who happens to be a Republican from Alaska. So I'm going to give Dr. Al Gross, a 35% chance of victory. Low, but not impossible, okay? More than 1 out of 3. All right, 35% chance of winning. I think that's definitely a little higher than people in the media are portraying this because, first of all, it's Alaska. Nobody talks about this state no matter what happens there. And number 2, the the main pickup opportunities for the Democrats have been elsewhere: Arizona, Colorado, Iowa, North Carolina, Maine, Kansas, Georgia. You get the point. Whereas in Alaska, I think people have kind of lost sight of this race, and only recently did the Lincoln Project begin taking ads out in the state. I'm a little surprised, frankly, that they have not taken out more, because to me, if you're a Democrat and you're within a couple of points of Dan Sullivan or of any Republican, you can win. So I'm giving Al Gross a 35% chance. I'm going to label it likely. Now in Oregon, Jeff Merkley, this is Oregon. It's a very safe Democratic state. Recently, the Cook Political Report did something kind of strange. They actually downgraded this to likely for the Democrats. I really don't understand why. We've hardly seen any polling here at all. In a Democrat, even in a Republican wave year, I really can't believe that this would ever, go a Republican Party's ways. In some of the gubernatorial races and things like that, or, the Republicans can get 42% and then kind of peak out around there. To me, Jeff Merkley, the incumbent Democrat, has a 99% chance of winning re-election. In Idaho, I think we can understand, too. This is a pretty easy retention for the Democrats. We do get that Jim Risch, he's not another guy who doesn't have, sky-high approval ratings. Paulette Jordan is also not, she has been someone that the Democratic Party has found to be kind of a rising star. But let's face it, how far is she going to rise? It's Idaho. And, at the end of the day, we've discussed at length in this race about how I think the Democratic Party should consider this state for kind of a long-term play, because Boise is growing and yada, yada, you get the point. But at the end of the day, it's just not really worth mentioning. I would give Jim Risch a 100% chance of re-election. Okay, Steve Daines in Montana definitely is going to be facing the toughest re-election bid of his electoral life. This is a tough race he is facing against Steve Bullock, the incumbent Democratic senator, or governor, I should say. He is, according to polls, the most popular politician in the state of Montana. Okay? At the end of the day, what we happen to know here is that the Democratic Party has obviously a very long history of getting candidates elected in this state. There's a House race here going on that's very competitive, a gubernatorial race here going on that is very competitive, and of course the Senate race to go along with the presidential race. Now, we recently gave Joe Biden well over 40% in the percentage prediction in the presidential race. To me, Steve Bullock is a very, very narrow underdog in this race. Very narrow underdog. Again, what he has going for him is high approval ratings as governor. He's the most popular politician in Montana. Voters overwhelmingly reelected him the same night in 2016 that they overwhelmingly elected Donald Trump. Okay? Now, it is interesting that there appears to be somewhat of a referendum going on in that the governorship race here between Greg Gianforte and Mike Cooney seems to be going the Republican Party's way. So the office that is being relinquished by Steve Bullock appears to be flipping seats. But strangely enough, the seat that Greg Gianforte is relinquishing to run for governor and replace Steve Bullock is in the process of also potentially flipping, as Kathleen Williams running for the House there seems to have the edge. Okay, so right now, polling has shown Steve Daines with a narrow lead for a while now. Bullock got out to an early jump, but since then, Daines has been able to overtake him. I give Steve Daines a 55% chance of re-election and Steve Bullock a 45% chance of re-election. Again, that doesn't mean that Steve Daines is going to win 55% to 45%. I just think it's that close. It's pretty much a coin flip, but Steve Daines has just a narrow edge. I'll put it this way. Imagine two coin flips, right? Bullock, let's say he calls heads. He has to win 2 out of 3, whereas Daines only kind of has to win 1 out of 3, essentially. I would give him a 55% chance of winning, whereas I think Steve Bullock is a narrow underdog, but should he win, don't be even narrowly surprised. It's still tilt. Now, obviously, this is an open seat here in Wyoming, but it's Wyoming at the end of the day. Cynthia Lummis is easily going to win this seat. I give her a 100% chance of winning in Wyoming. Now, in Colorado, John Hickenlooper is definitely the biggest favorite of any Democrat in states that they are attempting to unseat a Republican in. Cory Gardner, we already knew going into this election season that he was going to be among, if not probably, the most vulnerable GOP incumbent senator. And that has held true. He was going to be that anyway, even before the Democrats managed to field the best candidate that they could have in this state, and that is the very popular former governor, John Hickenlooper, who briefly, of course, ran for president before dropping out, shifting gears, and now challenging Cory Gardner. Gardner's approvals are in the toilet. He has voted with Donald Trump over 90% of the time. This is a tough state for Republicans to win in anyway. Okay, polling has been consistent in the state. Hickenlooper has outraised Gardner from the beginning. John Hickenlooper is in the driver's seat to take this Senate seat. I have him with a 65% chance of winning to Cory Gardner's 35% chance of winning. This to me is a likely Democratic state. Now, in Arizona, very similar to Colorado in that you have a very unpopular incumbent GOP senator. The only difference is she has actually lost before in Arizona, whereas Cory Gardner hasn't in the Senate. Martha McSally, lost 2 years ago, was unseated by Kyrsten Sinema, and she is on track to being unseated a second time, only this time by Mark Kelly. Mark Kelly has swiftly outraised her. Now, his numbers have dropped in recent weeks. Over the last 6 weeks, this has actually trended toward McSally a little bit, but Mark Kelly's lead was just too darn large. He had a big fundraising edge from the beginning, and I think the only reason that was even happening was because the Democrats, I think, had begun to turn their attention elsewhere. Some of the big PACs are not even spending in this race anymore. The Republicans are not spending in Colorado anymore either. They've given up on Cory Gardner, who apparently is already beginning to look for new work altogether. He knows that he's going to lose this race. Okay, and then same thing here in Arizona, where I just think that we have to basically agree that Mark Kelly has a pretty firm edge here. I would be genuinely surprised if he lost this state. Now, just because Arizona is a little bit less left-leaning at this point than Colorado, I'm going to go with a 60% chance of victory for Mark Kelly. I'm going to label it likely. Ben Ray Lujan, this is an open Democratic seat. The Republican Party, I think, in a Republican wave year, might have had a shot, kind of an outside shot at this. They do not have a shot at this race. Huge Democratic wave year, huge Hispanic turnout expected in this state. I give Ben Ray Lujan, who is the current representative from the state, an 85% chance of re-election. I'm labeling it safe. Mike Rounds in South Dakota, the only thing he ever had to worry about was the fact that sometimes the Democrats can really, really do a good job in this state. The state-run South Dakota Democratic Party is extremely well run. They have extremely progressive policies up there, which is kind of surprising for a red wall state, but they've done a good job of that. And remember, Kristi Noem, the Republican governor there, she had a tough race against Bill Sutton. It was about 53-47, but that just hasn't materialized this time for the Democrats. To me, Mike Rounds has a 95% chance of winning. I'll label it that way. Ben Sasse, it's not even really a real race. I know that recently he was on tape making some very, very he was critiquing Donald Trump pretty sharply, but again, that's after the primary, the whole thing. To me, he has a 100% chance of re-election. Now, this is an open Republican GOP seat after the retirement of Pat Roberts, longtime GOP senator from Kansas. Right now, it is between Roger Marshall and Barbara Bollier. The Democrats obviously have a lot of enthusiasm and are kind of bullish about this race, far more than I am for their sake. Partly because of what happened in 2018, right? Laura Kelly defeated Chris Kobach in 2018. Big surprise. Okay, we knew it would be a little closer than usual. We definitely did not expect Laura Kelly to actually end up winning that governor's race and give it back to the Democrats. Now, Barbara Bollier was a pretty good candidate for the Democrats. She's a former Republican. Okay, switched parties. She's a state senator. And so there's definitely some contingency available to her, and she has a constituency that is definitely going to follow her and pull the lever for her. Polling has been pretty consistent throughout this. It has shown Marshall, the current representative, with a small lead, usually either just outside the margin of error or just inside the margin of error. We have seen a couple polls here and there that have shown Barbara Bollier leading. For some context, this race is kind of similar to what we saw in the Georgia general election race for months and months and months up until the last few weeks when Jon Ossoff really started to push it and basically tied it all together at this point. Okay, so I think that Barbara Bollier has a reason, and by the way, she has way outraised Roger Marshall. Roger Marshall has not done well financially in this race. I think there's a little bit of complacency on the part of the Republican Party here, but I think part of that is justified because they're so concerned elsewhere on this map, provided they also only have really one pickup opportunity in Alabama. Okay, so to me, Roger Marshall, I think he's going to have to sweat this one out a little bit. Okay, I'm going to give him a 60% chance of winning. Okay, Barbara Bollier to me has a 40% chance of winning, which is rather high, again, for a Democrat in Kansas. So if Barbara Bollier wins, I would be surprised. But again, this is a huge Democratic wave here, and all over this map, the Democrats are playing and playing hard. I'm giving Marshall a 60% chance of winning. Jim Inhofe has a 100% chance of winning. Now, in Texas, to me, this is pretty close. in that the presidential race, I think, is pushing this further down the field for MJ Hager. MJ Hager is going to get close to the final vote share that Beto O'Rourke got in 2018. People are losing sight of that. The polling has not been that different between those two races. Ted Cruz usually led by 3 to 4% over Beto O'Rourke, and the polls were exactly just about right. In fact, they actually shifted leftward from that by like a 8 or 9 tenths of a point. Okay, we also know that in Texas, the polls shifted by 3% to the left from the final polling averages on Election Day in the presidential race 4 years ago. Donald Trump led by 12 points on Election Day, ended up winning by 9%. So John Cornyn has typically led. It's narrowed ever so slightly in the last 3 weeks from about 8 points to 7 points is usually the lead now for John Cornyn on average. So I think that MJ Hager is going to get basically around where Beto O'Rourke got, probably a little below that. But because of the astronomically high voting totals that we're seeing in the state of Texas right now, I think MJ Hager is going to get around 46, 47%. I'm going to give her a 42% chance of winning because I'm just going to give it above that 40% mark. So to me, she gets it kind of in that range where it's possible, but still rather unlikely. I'd have it as lean Republican. Jason Lewis's campaign has kind of fallen through the roof a little bit here. He had emergency surgery a few days, like about a week ago now or so. He was never really in position to win this race anyway. Tina Smith was most vulnerable 2 years ago in that special election where she was replacing the outgoing and resigned Senator Al Franken. The Republicans couldn't flip that seat even then. The Democrats swept the midterms in 2018 in this state, winning the governorship and both Senate races. To me, Tina Smith is very much in the clear. To me, she has a 90% chance of winning. I'm labeling it safe. Now, Teresa Greenfield in Iowa, this is a coin flip. It's kind of similar to Montana, but to me, it's even closer than Montana. I gave Steve Daines a 55% chance of re-election. So what we've seen here is Teresa Greenfield has launched a very good campaign against Joni Ernst. She has outraised her. She has outspent her. She took the lead and led within the margin of error, though, for quite a while. She has a very small lead over Joni Ernst, okay? Very small lead. To me, this is literally 50-50, basically, but because Teresa Greenfield still has a very, very small lead, I hate to do this, but I'm literally giving Teresa Greenfield the nod here, 51% to 49%. It is so close here. I think the Democrats have an interesting play here in that they have the opportunity to elect 4 women to Congress in this state alone, 3 of which are coming from the House. All 3 Democrats that represent 3 of the 4 House districts in Iowa are on track to win re-election, among them Cindy Axne, Abby Finkenauer. The third one is escaping me right now. J.D. Scholten is even in a competitive race up here in this district that was for years controlled by Steve King, who was primaried out earlier this season. So I think Teresa Greenfield literally has the tiniest of advantages here. This is basically a coin flip. I'm giving her a 51% chance of victory. Tom Cotton has 100%, and Bill Cassidy also has a 100% chance of re-election. Now, Cindy Hyde-Smith is in a competitive race against Mike Espy. I think I've been a little too dismissive of this race, but I also, I don't think that too much more attention really should be paid to it anyway. Okay, Mike Espy lost to Cindy Hyde-Smith when she was definitely at her most vulnerable. She had recently before that special election, made some pretty tone-deaf, incendiary comments at best. And Mike Espy ran a good race and came up 8 points short, 54 to 46. That's kind of where the polling is again in this race now. Now, the Lincoln Project is obviously convinced enough to the point where they have actually taken out some ads in this state. When the Lincoln Project believes you have a chance, they're going to go for it. Now, of course, they have so much money to burn that they might as well, even in some of these long shot races. I'm going to give Mike Espy about a 30% chance of re-election. Now, I know that that's a little bit contradictory to everything I've said about this state throughout the election season, because turnout is going to be so high, but I've never actually once characterized this state as even a tilt either way. So 30% I still think is plenty respectful to Mike Espy and his campaign. Possible, but pretty unlikely. Cindy Hyde-Smith is going to be just fine. I'm labeling it likely. Alabama, Doug Jones will lose this race to Tommy Tuberville. I'd be very surprised if Tommy Tuberville did not win this race at this point. Tuberville is someone that I think is taking advantage of the fact that this is Alabama at the end of the day. This is ruby red Alabama. They elected a very moderate Democratic senator in the most special of circumstances, and even then, it was an extremely close race. Even then, and it took hundreds and hundreds of, it took ridiculous amounts of fundraising, a very moderate candidate, and an extremely bad Republican candidate for the Democrats to barely win one statewide race here. Tommy Tuberville will unseat Doug Jones. I think Doug Jones will get over 40%, but just barely. I think Tommy Tuberville has an 80% chance of re-election. I'm going to label it safe. All right, this one is pretty interesting here, okay? This, as I said, is kind of similar to the Kansas race, but only from earlier on in the race. Okay, now Jon Ossoff is right in this thing with David Perdue. It is close. It is close, okay? Jon Ossoff may well win this race. Let's look at the most recent polling. We've seen, obviously, this is in congruence with the special election race that we're going to get to in a minute, but let's get to it here. Tie, then Perdue +1, Ossoff +3, Ossoff +7. Then we have a bunch in the special race, and Ossoff +1, +2, +3. Okay, then +6, +1, and a University of Georgia poll, -1, -5, tie, Perdue +2, Ossoff +5. So you get the idea. It's pretty close. Okay, very, very close. Turnout is very high in this state to this point. I think this is a state, though, where David Perdue kind of survives because of the party affiliation here. I think he just narrowly survives because he has, the incumbency advantage, and because we don't have that big a history of Ossoff being able to win in this state. Okay, I mean, he's only run in local, and he ran in that House race and lost in the most expensive House race in United States history. So I think all that is reason to believe that he will come close, but I think he's going to come up just short. But again, there's no reason to believe that he can't win this race. I have this pretty similar to the Montana race, 55% chance for David Perdue, 45% chance for Jon Ossoff. In the special election, however, Raphael Warnock has surged into a dominant lead over Kelly Loeffler and Doug Collins. He will easily finish in first place in the primary voting. He will not reach 50%, however. It is remained to be seen, though, whether or not Doug Collins or Kelly Loeffler will be the nominee, or not the nominee, I guess, but who will end up advancing to the runoff to face off with Raphael Warnock. At this point, if I had to guess, I still think it would be Doug Collins because Kelly Loeffler is still facing charges of insider trading along with Richard Burr, so that doesn't make her too electable at the moment. Right now, Raphael Warnock has the edge here. He does. I'm labeling it lean. I think Raphael Warnock, again, just right now, and remember, we have a long way to go in this race. Okay, so we don't quite know yet. This is still very early in that race. If I had to guess right now, I think Raphael Warnock has a 60% chance of winning right now. That is what the polls show. It is that big a lead for him. And we've even seen polling that has him in hypothetical matchups with both Doug Collins and Kelly Loeffler, and he wins in both of them. He wins in both. Now in South Carolina, this is another state that really wasn't supposed to be even remotely close. Then it was supposed to be, okay, it's, kind of competitive, but it's still not really going to be that big a deal. To now, Jamie Harrison can win this race. He has raised more money than any Senate candidate in United States history, to the point where Lindsey Graham is literally going on television every night and begging for money on Fox News, literally begging for money. His approvals stink, we know that. His blatant walk back of what we saw from 2016 to now, and again, that's not a partisan thing. I mean, it's pretty obvious. I mean, he said one thing in 2016. He's not saying the opposite. Is he the first senator to do that? Of course not. We've seen countless Republicans do that, countless Democrats do that. But it happened, and that doesn't make him that electable. And the Lincoln Project and others have obviously pounced on that, as has Jamie Harrison's campaign. Now, in the early portions of the campaign season, Lindsey Graham had a double-digit lead. It kind of narrowed up a little bit to like maybe 8%, something like that. 2, we started seeing Jamie Harrison actually leading a couple polls consecutively in highly graded pollsters. The ones he began to lose at that point had him down 2%, 1%, a tie altogether. Okay, the fundraising in this state has been ridiculous for Jamie Harrison. There's still a lot of Democrats who really believe he can win. And remember, this is a state that is a little closer than people give it credit for, because there was a gubernatorial race here recently in which that didn't really get much attention, Henry McMaster and James Smith, the Democrat. That was 54 to 46. 54 to 46. And that was without anywhere near the amount of money Jamie Harrison has raised. James Smith trailed in the polls throughout the election season, sometimes by more than what Jamie Harrison has. And Henry McMaster was not someone that the entire Democratic base around the country was consolidating their support against, to fundraise for his opponent. All right. So right now, with all that said, I'm still only going to give Jamie Harrison a 25% chance of winning this race. But again, for the fact of the matter is, South Carolina, is not an easy state for any Democrat to win in. Even Jim Clyburn in the old days had a little bit of a hard time. Now, obviously, it's safe for him. But this is a state that could elect Jamie Harrison. I'd be a little surprised for sure. 25% chance. I'm labeling it lean for Lindsey Graham. Bill Hagerty, this is Tennessee. Sometimes the Democratic Party can be competitive here, but just not anymore at this point. I'm going to give Bill Hagerty a 95% chance of winning this race. Cal Cunningham has seemingly overcome himself. Oh boy. Cal Cunningham has seemingly overcome himself a little bit in this state. His scandals definitely hurt him a little bit. Okay, his lead shrank, but I think it happened at the right time, so to speak, for him, in that he was ahead by enough. Number one, it was pretty close to the election, so obviously there wasn't that much time for ads and stuff to be taken out about it, number one. And number two, a bunch of people had already voted. And then also around the same time, Thom Tillis tested positive for coronavirus, sidelining him from campaigning for too aggressively. All right. And of course, Thom Tillis has been pretty unabashed about his support for Amy Coney Barrett. And I mean, there you go. Right. So I think the writing is on the wall a little bit for Thom Tillis. I think he kind of had a last gasp when we saw this scandal come out about Cal Cunningham, but it just hasn't worked. Yes, his lead has shrank, but again, a lot of votes have already been cast here. Look, Thom Tillis may actually lead at the end of at midnight, November 4th, Wednesday morning, just because mail-in ballots in this state are expected to be quite high. Okay, so we don't quite know the final result. We may not know the final result just yet, but I still think Cal Cunningham has the edge here. Again, I sort of hate giving these like random numbers in between the 5s and 10s, but sometimes that's kind of what you have to do to really give it a proper characterization where one is too high and one is too low. To me, this is like a 57-58% chance of victory for Cal Cunningham, where he's in a better position to win here than 55 to 45 here. Whereas 60, I think, would be a little too high. I think Cal Cunningham has the edge here. 58% chance, kind of in that range. Dick Durbin will be just fine in Illinois. I'd be shell-shocked if he lost. And in fact, I would imagine that they call this right at closing hour. Dick Durbin has a 99% chance of victory. I think I said 100% somewhere on this map. I forget which. I may have been. I forget which one. We can't ever quite say that. I correct that. The ones I said 100%. Let's make it 99%. Okay. Mitch McConnell. Look, Amy McGrath did a great job raising a bunch of money. Chuck Schumer personally recruited her for this race, but it looks like $50 million down the drain a little bit. Okay. She'll eventually become a panelist on CNN. She's not going anywhere. But she was never really going to win this race. I think there was some enthusiasm about her early on the Democratic Party side. I think she'll get around 42% of the vote a little bit. It won't be like a landslide for Mitch McConnell, but it won't be close either. He has a 90% chance of re-election. Shelley Moore Capito, she has a 99% chance of re-election. And Mark Warner, just because Virginia is inherently a much closer state, and Daniel Gade is someone the Republican Party has done a good job kind of propping up, I'm going to give Mark Warner a 90% chance of re-election. Okay, now in Michigan, obviously a pretty competitive race here. But this, I think the clock has run out for the Republicans on this one. John James, I think, has just run out of time. It's basically an identical race to what happened 2 years ago. He ran against Debbie Stabenow, ran a good race, a solid race, and had an opportunity to flip this state, but it just hasn't worked out. The Democrats have been able to pretty much put this thing away. I think it'll be relatively tight, and I think that we're going to have a few hours of serious counting. And there may be, because certain counties are going to report at certain times. We may get some moments where it looks a little wobbly. for Gary Peters, but ultimately I fully expect him to survive this. I think it's a little less close than people are making it out to be. John James has never led throughout this election season, and at times he's trailed by big margins. I'm going to give Gary Peters a 65% chance of re-election, and that's going to make it likely. The VP nod, as we know, will go to the Democrats at this point. Chris Coons, 99%. Cory Booker, 99%. Jack Reed, 99%. And Ed Markey, 99%. These will all be called right at closing hour. Now, in New Hampshire, Jeanne Shaheen, I think it's sometimes, obviously we've talked about this at length before, how the Republican Party can get a lot done in this state. They have the governorship here, Chris Sununu, and to me, they have a formula and a path for getting the other Senate seat here in 2 years. When Maggie Hassan, who unseated Kelly Ayotte in the state by only 1,017 voters 4 years ago, she is up for re-election in 2 years, and should Chris Sununu be the candidate that is thrown at her, I could see this actually flipping. But right now, no polling has indicated Courtney Messner is going to beat Jeanne Shaheen. To me, this is an 85% chance of re-election for Jeanne Shaheen and the Democrats. They're already up to 51. That's 5 flips, and we still haven't gotten to Maine yet. Now, kind of similar to Michigan, I just think the clock has run out on Susan Collins. Time has run out on her. She's trailed the whole election season. Now, she's never been that far behind. And we saw 2 polls released just the other day that had her within 1 point and 2 points of Sarah Gideon. Now, to me, this race is closer than I expected it would be at this point. Okay, neither candidate has pulled away. Sarah Gideon has failed to pull away. And I did, for a long time throughout this election season, say that I think Susan Collins was going to be able to eventually turn this thing around. She did get an endorsement from Joe Lieberman, a Democrat. However, I don't think that really holds much weight. I don't think you're going to get any Democrats that are going to turn around and vote for Susan Collins because of an endorsement from Joe Lieberman. Number one, Joe Lieberman is not that consequential a figure now. And also, Democrats don't really like Joe Lieberman. I mean, there's a long history of Democrats who have kind of been disappointed with him. He got booed at Obama's inauguration in 2008 for crying out loud. Okay, so I mean, Democrats don't really like him. And for the record, Joe Lieberman's own son is running for the Senate in this race down here, the special election. He's in that primary, or the jungle system down there. I don't know about you. If I was running for office and my dad, endorsed someone of the opposite party, unless it was a relative, that would be an awkward Thanksgiving, or in my case, an awkward Hanukkah. So I don't know about you, but that to me I don't think that really holds much weight. Susan Collins could win this race, but I definitely would be surprised at this point if she did. I think the polling is a little wider than people think. Remember, this rural area up here in northern Maine is where Susan Collins actually absolutely just has to blow away the numbers. And a Democrat currently represents that district in the House. That's Jared Golden, and he's cruising on his way to re-election. Okay, so that part of the path to re-election for Susan Collins is narrow, okay? Right now, I'm giving Sarah Gideon a 60% chance of winning. It is lean Democrats still for me, even with those tightening polls. There you go. That's 6 pickups for the Democrats, even with 1 lost in Alabama. Arizona, Colorado, Iowa, North Carolina, Maine. Let's also, and Georgia here. Let's also talk about how the Republican Party is in a pretty dire position here in the Senate, okay? Because there's no reason to believe that they can siphon off either of these two here, okay? Let's say that they survive here in Iowa. They still lose the Senate, okay? Let's also say that they make a little bit of a surprise comeback. I guess the best option for them at this point would be as if they start to really consolidate some support around whoever ends up moving on to the runoff in Georgia, and they keep that in their column as well. Well, they still don't actually have it yet because they're also in trouble in the presidential race. The only way this can happen is if they survive in Iowa, survive both in Georgia, which doesn't look like they may actually lose both of them down there. And I guess between these two, Susan Collins probably survives here in Maine. Okay? Do you really think this is what's going to happen? And that's only if they survive here in Montana, which is no done deal. Right? Kansas, we're not totally sure yet. South Carolina, we're not totally sure yet either. And even Alaska is something that, again, wild card state, we don't quite know. So a lot has to break right for the Republicans in order for them to only lose 3 seats. Okay? That is the situation that they are in the Senate. We know that there's no reason to believe they can flip this. There's no reason to believe they can really survive in either of these, especially that one. They have no chance to flip this one, even though it's an open seat. I still think Cal Cunningham is in the driver's seat. But again, this is the current characterization that we have. There you go. Okay? Oh, and this one. 52 for the Democrats. And remember, the map is even less favorable to the Republicans in 2 years. So as we always do, let's go through all the winners. Dan Sullivan in Alaska, Jeff Merkley in Oregon, Jim Risch in Idaho, Steve Daines in Montana, Cynthia Loomis in Wyoming, John Hickenlooper in Colorado, Mark Kelly wins in Arizona, and Ben Ray Lujan in New Mexico. Mike Rounds in South Dakota, Ben Sass in Nebraska, Roger Marshall in Kansas, Jim Inhofe in Oklahoma, and John Cornyn in Texas. We have Tina Smith winning in Minnesota, Teresa Greenfield with a narrowest of margins in Iowa, Tom Cotton in Arkansas, and Bill Cassidy in Louisiana. We have Cindy Hyde-Smith winning in Mississippi, Tommy Tuberville winning in Alabama, David Perdue wins in Georgia, and Raphael Warnock fills the open seat as a flip for the Democrats in Georgia. We then have Bill Hagerty easily winning in Tennessee, Lindsey Graham surviving in South Carolina, and Cal Cunningham surviving in North Carolina. Dick Durbin wins in Illinois, McConnell wins, Mitch McConnell in Kentucky, Shelley Moore Capito in West Virginia, and Daniel Gade in Virginia. Then in Michigan, we have Gary Peters surviving against John James. Kamala Harris gets the VP nod, and then Chris Coons, Cory Booker, Jack Reed, and Ed Markey win in Delaware, New Jersey, Rhode Island, and Massachusetts. Jeanne Shaheen wins in New Hampshire, and Sarah Gideon wins in Maine, giving the Democrats 52 seats to the Republicans 48. So thank you guys so much again for watching this video. Please hit the subscribe button down below. Comment down in the comment section below if you have any comments, concerns, questions, corrections, anything you may have. You guys know that I like to listen to those comments. If it's good and insightful and it's a real question and not, Biden 2020 or something like that, if it's real, I definitely could understand. Now I wanted to point something out. I got a comment here from Steve Kraus on our "How the hell does Trump win?" Video. So here's what Steve had to say. Great stuff, Evan. Thanks also for what it's worth. I live in Michigan and Trump is still airing ads here. Okay, so here's the point. Those were bought a long time ago, right? So when I say they've pulled out their ads here, it doesn't mean that they have, in some cases it does literally mean that they've canceled their ad buys, right? But there are different rules about how that can actually be done and whether or not you can be refunded, all that stuff. What has happened is they have literally stopped airing new ads here, in that they have stopped airing, they've stopped investing in advertising here. Those ads that you are seeing, Steve, were bought a long time ago, and so they just haven't been investing anything new there. So sometimes that could be a little misleading when you see a big headline like Trump pulls ads out of Florida. Well, you're still going to be seeing ads there. It's just that they've been booked way back, sometimes like even in May and beyond that too. Okay, so that is something to keep in mind. But again, thanks so much for the comment, Steve. Great question. So again, comment down in the suggestions below with anything you may have for me, and I'll be sure to give you a shout out and give you any insight I may have on your question. So thank you guys again so much for watching, and I'll see you in November.